Dora by Alfred H Miles. Tell you a story, master Uri. Ah, there's only one story as ought to be told in this your stable, and that's the old un as a loose hupsets me to tell. But I don't mind a-goin' over the old ground once agin, master Uri, as you know werry well, if these your gents, as a mind to listen to a hold man's yarn. It beats all the printed stories as ever I see, but then, as I ain't no scholar, and can't see werry well neither, p-raps that ain't no much wonder arter all. Reading ain't much in my line, yer see, sir, and as the old master used to say, bring up your boys to the preofficians your means to foller. Osses is my preoffician, sir, and osses I was brought up to. Excuse me just a minute, sir, if yer don't mind settin' on this your stool. I don't like to see nobody leanin' agin that their post. That were Snowflake's stall, sir, in the old time, and Snowflake were little Dora's pony. My father were ostler here, sir, afore I were born, and I growed up to the stable, master, Uri, just as your ol' father growed up to the all. It were in ol' Sir Markham's time, this were, ol' Sir Markham, whose picture hangs above the mantel in the dinninall, as fine a hold English gentleman as ever crossed a unter and follered the ounds. The first time as ever I see Sir Markham were when I were about 4-year-old. O' course, we lived on the estate, but I don't know as I'd ever been up to the all till that particular mornin', when I came a message for my father, and meets ol' Sir Markham in the park. Now yer know, Sir Markham were a queer old chap when he liked. He didn't take no nonsense from nobody, he didn't. I've seen him thrash the keeper afore now with his own ridin' whip, and he wouldn't stood particular about a boy or two, and as there'd been a deal of fruit stole out the orchard about that time, he thought he'd just up and fright me a bit. So he hollers out, "Hi, there you boy, what right you got in my park?" But I see a sort twinkle in his eye, so I knowed he weren't real cross, and so I up and says, "Ain't boys got a right to go where their fathers is?" He didn't say nothing more to me then, but when he sees my father he says, "That's a smart boy o' yours, Jim," he says, "and when he's a bit older yer must ave I am up air to elp." Well, sir, I got a bit older in time, and I come up air to elp, and, septin for a very little while, I've been air ever since. I were a boy of 14 when the things append as make up the rest o' my story. Sir Markham he were a matter 60-year-old, I should say, and Miss Dora, as I see it said in a book, once, sweet, worry sweet, worry sweet 17. I alludes at a admiration for Miss Dora. Darling Dora they called at the all, and so did I, when nobody wasn't listenin'. Nobody couldn't know without admirin' but I 'ad a special sort of admiration for as ad made me do any mortal thing she asked me, whatever it might ave costed. Yer see, when I were quite a little chap, and she were no much bigger, she says to me one day, when I were a bit scolded, she says, "Never mind, Jim," she says, "cheer up, you'll be a man o' some sort some day." And I tell you, though I alludes at a idea that way myself, when she said it I growed a hinch straight off. If yer believes in yourself, master, Uri, yer can do a lot, but if somebody else believes in yer there ain't nothink in the whole world what yer can't do. My particular business in the stable were Miss Dora's pony, Snowflake, darling Dora's darling, as it got called times. She rode out a great deal, did Miss Dora, and she rode well, and I generally 'ad to foller on the bay cob. She'd spend a lot o' time about this your stable, one way and another, and we got to be werry particular friends. Not as I presumed, mind yer, nor as she forgot station. She were just a hangel, she were, what couldn't be spoilt by nobody's company, and what couldn't elp mackin'. Oh, other people wish as they were summat in the hangel line, too. But you're gettin' impatient I see, gents, and I ax your pardon for ramblin' a bit. Well, it were Christmas time, as it might be now, and young Markham, that were your father, master Uri, he were 'ome from Oxford for his 'olidays, with as nice a young fellow as ever stepped, as 'ad come with him to spend Christmas at the all. They called the captain, not that he were a harmy captain, or anythink of that. He were a captain of summat at the college, maybe football or summat else. Somehow he often came 'ome with young Markham at 'oliday times, and and Miss Dora was particular friendly like. It were not a werry snowy Christmas that year, though there were plenty of frost, and the lake in the park would have borne the London coach and four without a crack. Young Markham and the captain and Miss Dora did a deal o' scattin', and ol' Sir Markham invited a lot of friends to come and stay Christmas for the sake o' the sport. They did say as Aunt Dorothy as Miss Dora were called arter, 'ad been preachin', at for neglektin', Miss Dora and keepin', at the all without no society, And I suppose that's why Sir Markham were a Giditon himself a bit cross. We never add no fuss at Christmas as a rule. Well, we was very busy at that time, I can tell yer. Several of the visitors brought their own osses with them, and me and my father had plenty to do a lookin' arter 'em. Among the visitors as come from London were a real military hofficer, a reglar scaffold pole he were, for length and breadth, with mustaches as a done for reins, if e'd only been a oss. He weren't no favourite o' mine, not from the fust. He were a bit too harbitry for me. He were a thinkin', he were a goin' to hintroduce is harmy ridge relations into our stables, but he alloos ad to wait the longest, for all is hinterferin'. But what used to rile me the most with him were is nasty, sneerin' ways at young Markham's friend, the captain. Yer see, sir, he were a real harmy captain, and so I s'pose he were a bit jealous o' our young captain, as was a lot better than I am, arter all. O' course I didn't see it at the time, but I've said to myself lots o' times since, it were a reglar plant, that's what it were, that Aunt Dorothy ad brought the big soldier down o' purpose for Miss Dora to fall in love with. But were just a little bit too late. Well, yer know, gents, I told yer as I were quite a youngster at the time, and though ol' Sir Markham said as I were werry sharp, I must confess as I didn't quite understand 'ow things were a-goin' on. I noticed that the two captains kept pretty clear of each other, and that Miss Dora never came near the stables for 3 days together, which were a werry unusual thing for and one of the ol' servants at the 'all told me as the hofficer 'ad been hasking Sir Markham if he might pay his addresses to Miss Dora, and that Sir Markham ad said he might. My ol' father were a Hackton, a bit queer about that time, too. He kept a haskin' me if I'd like to be a postboy, or drive the London coach, or anything o' that costs, he says. Yer know, Jim, Miss Dora'll be marryin' somebody one o' these days, and maybe you'll ave to find summat else to do when Snowflake's gone. Well, I says, if Miss Dora got married and goed away, I reckon she'd take me with to look arter osses, so I shan't want no postboy's place nor coachin's neither as I sees. And father he seemed pretty satisfied, he did, only he says, if ever you should want to drive to Scotland, Jim, he says, you go across the moor to the Burnley beaches, and then yer bears off to your right by the Ambley Arms, 3 mile along you'll find the Great North Road, and there yer are. Well, I didn't take no notice of this, though father he kept on sayin' summat the sort all day long, and when it came to evenin', bane Christmas Eve, we went up to the 'all to ave supper in the kitchen, and drink ol' Sir Markham's elth. Sir Markham come down in the servants' 'all and made a speech, and some the gents come down too. But while things were a-goin' at their iggest, my father he says to me, Jim, he says, if ever you want to go to Scotland, you go across the moor to the Burnley beaches, and then yer bears off to your right by the Ambley Arms, 3 mile along you'll find the Great North Road, and there yer are. All right, I says, angry like, I don't want no Scotland. What d'yer want to bother me for with your Burnley beaches and your Ambley Arms? Jim, he says solemn, you never know how useful a bit of information may come in sometimes. Now, he says, you'd better run over to the stables, and see if all is a-goin' on right. Well, I see it was no use argifyin', so off I starts. I sees as I comes near the stables as there were a light there, as ought not to be, and course, I run back'ard to tell my father, but lor, I thought he were off his 'ead, for all he says was, if ever you wants to go to Scotland, Jim, it's across the moor to the Burnley beaches, off to your right, by the Ambley Arms, 3 mile along you'll find the Great North Road, and there yer are. They'd been drinkin', a bit ard some of 'em, and I says to myself father's been a-'elpin' of 'em, and I tears off to the stables to see what was up. Well, when I gets here, I comes in at that there door behind yer, sir, and what should I see, but Miss Dora in Snowflake's stall, kissin' and cryin', over I am like mad. She didn't take no notice me no more'n if I hadn't been there at all, and I came and stood agin that there post as you were leanin' agin just now, sir. Little Dora were sobbin' as if art would break, and she were a-tryin' to say goodbye. They're only little words, sir, at the most, but werry often they're the artist words in all the world to say. Well, sir, to make a long story short, it were just this. Sir Markham had told as she mustn't think nothink of young Markham's college friend, 'cause he were poor and 'adn't nothink but his wits and his learnin' to live on, and that the tall soldier 'ad been haskin' for and he'd promised to I am, and it 'ad clean broke art, and so she 'ad come down to this your stable where everythink loved to tell sorrows to her old pet Snowflake, to bury her face in his snowy neck, and wipe eyes on his flowin' mane. But afore I had time to say anythink, who should follow me in at the door but the young captain hisself, and he come and stood by me a moment without sayin' a word. He were very pale, and his eyes shone like fire, and at last he says, in a hoarse sort of a whisper, "Jim," he says, "they wants to marry darling Dora to the big swaggerin' soldier, and I want yer to help me perwen 'em." "Help yer perwen 'em," I says. "Why, I'll perwen 'em myself. I ain't wery big, p-raps, and maybe I couldn't reach his bloated face, but a stone 'ud find his head as quickly as it did the big Bible chap as David killed, and maybe I can shy." I hadn't practiced on ol' Sir Markham's apples for nothink. Well, sir, I needn't say as it didn't come to that. The fact is, everythink were arranged. It were a matter o' 70 miles to Scotland by the road, and they'd made up their minds to start for Gretna Green as soon as the Whissiters 'ad gone to bed. Father were in the swim, and that's why he'd been tin to me all day, and 'ad sent me to see what the light meant. My father were a artful ol' man. He knowed better nor to ave anything to do with it hisself. Why, I believe Sir Markham 'ud a murdered I am if he 'ad, but me, o' course, I was only a boy and did as I were told. Well, sir, Hackton, under horders, I were a-waitin' with the post-chaise at them Burnley beaches at 11 o'clock. I'd been a-waitin' some time, and I begun to be afraid as they weren't common. At last I see a white somethink common along, and in another minute they was alongside. I shall never forget that night. Miss Dora fainted directly she were inside the carriage, and to me she looked as if she were dead. "For God's sake and for Dora's sake, drive for your life, Jim," said the young captain, and I just did drive for my wery life. It was wery dark and I couldn't see much, and it must have been rainin' or summat else. Anyhow there were a precious lot o' water got in my eyes, till I couldn't see nothink. Father had taken care to get the 'osses in good condition, and they went away as though they knew as they were carryin' their darlin' Dora from death to life. From the Burnley beaches I drove as I 'ad been directed, past the Ambley Arms, and 3 mile further I found the Great North Road, and there I wore. You never know how useful a bit o' information may come in sometimes. It were pretty straight work now, and the only thing I 'ad to fear was wearin' out me 'osses afore we reached the border. At 2 o'clock we stopped and baited, and the young captain he give me the tip. He says, "Don't go too fast," he says. "They won't be arter us for an hour or two yet if they come at all. I've given 'em summat else to look for fust," he says, "and it'll take 'em all their time." While there ain't no need to make a long story out o' our run to Scotland, we got there safe enough arter imaginin', as we was follered by highwaymen, and goblins and soldiers, and all sorts o' other hevil sperits, which were nothink but fancy arter all. Why, bless yer, we 'adn't no real need to fear. The young captain he were one too many for 'em, he were, in more ways nor one. Afore he came away he smashed a big hole in the ice, in the middle of the lake, and put his and Miss Dora's muff on the edge of the hole, and they were a-breaking up the ice and dragging the lake all Christmas Day instead of follerin' us. Next thing came the weddin' in the blacksmith's shop, where the young captain took our darling Dora all to hisself, with ne'er a bridesmaid but me to give 'er away and everythink else. Poor little Dora, she fainted right off agin directly it were all over, and the young captain he flushed up regular, like one o' them hero chaps as they put in books. I never see such a change in anyone afore or since. E seemed as if e could do anything now Miss Dora were hall his own. I tell yer, sir, you can't fight nothing like arf so 'ard for yourself as yer can if you've got someone else to fight for. After the weddin', the captain put up at the Blacksmith's Arms, where e writes a long letter to ol' Sir Markham, and one to your father, master, which he give me to deliver, and with which I started agin. Ol' Sir Markham never forgave the young captain for runnin' off Miss Dora, and if it 'adn't been for your father, master, I shouldn't never come back to the all. Arter that they went abroad to some foreign place as I never heard of, and they lost track of 'em up at the all too arter a bit. Though I know as your father, master, used to send 'em lots o' things without Sir Markham knowin' anythink about it. And then came the letter with the black edge as said as our Dora 'ad died o' one of them furrin fevers as I didn't even know the name of, and arter that we never heard no more. Poor ol' Sir Markham began to break up wery soon arter that. He were not like the same man arter Miss Dora went, and wery soon e kept to the ooze altogether, and we never saw nothink of out o' doors. Next thing we 'eard as he were ill, and everybody were wishin' as Miss Dora 'ud come back and comfort at last when he were really a-dyin'. E kept on callin' her Dora Dora, In his wanderins like, and nobody couldn't answer I am, their arts was that full as there weren't no room for words. I remember that night, sir, as if it were yesterday, and yet it were 40 year ago, master, or 10 year afore you were born. It were Christmas Eve, and ol' Sir Markham he were keepin' on a haskin for Miss Dora, and I couldn't stand it no longer, so I come over air to smoke my pipe and be to myself, yer see, and bide my feelin's like. Well, I were sittin' on a stool in that there corner, thinkin' about ol' Sir Markham and our darlin' Dora, when I looks up, and as true as I ever see anythin', in my life I see her standin' there afore me. She didn't take no notice of me though, but she run into Snowflake's stall there, sir, and buried her pretty face in his neck and stroked his mane and patted his sides. Then she laughed one o' her silvery laughs and clapped hands and calls out, Ome again at last, happy, happy Ome. Jim, Jim, where's that lazy Jim? But lor, sir, she were gone agin afore I could get up off the stool. I rushed up to the all like lightnin', I can tell yer, and I see a bright light shinin' in ol' Sir Markham's bedroom. I never knowed 'ow I got up them stairs, but I heard ol' Sir Markham cry out as loud as ever I heard I am in my life, Dora, Dora, come at last, darling Dora, darling. Never said no more, did ol' Sir Markham, she had taken I am away. You'll excuse me, Haskin, you not to lean agin that post, won't you, sir? It's a kind sort friend mine. There ain't a sorrow as I've ever had these 40 year that I haven't shared with that post. It ave been watered by little Dora's tears, and it ave been watered by mine, and there ain't nothink in the ole world as I wallows more. It ain't for the likes o' me to talk o' lovin' a hangel like sir, but I aven't never loved no one else from that day to this, and maybe when my turn comes at last, master, to go where there ain't no difference between rich and poor, I may ear bright sweet voice cry out agin to me. Ome agin, Jim, happy, happy Ome.